let's get the party started. You are in for a treat with Lindsay today, aka Dr. J, because I love to call her Dr. J because it's fun. She's not a very good basketball player, though, I've heard. But she's one heck of a nerd. So we all have that problem. At any rate, membership event, I think we're up to number 006. We've all kinds of stuff cooking in the background. Hopefully you all saw the Google playlist, or I'm sorry, the YouTube playlist in the Cal invite. We've been just pushing things over there as our temporary house for everything if you cannot make it. We do try and have some events in the morning and some in the night so that we can kind of service different time zones, but everything's being recorded. But you're probably curious. You're probably like, oh, what events are next? Well, let me tell you what's next. Next Friday, we actually moved this event from the following week. So Evelyn's going to do, one of our managing directors is going to do How I Became a Behavioral Scientist. Her story is actually quite wacky and there's some fun detours there. So that's next Friday. It's going to be at 11 a.m. PST, so a little bit later. Then next Thursday, hopefully you all saw the invite for this. I'm having a grammar moment where I'm realizing I have weird periods and commas, but let's not fixate. Next Thursday, Thursday, May 19th, we have an open event. So that's Don't Trust Your Gut with Seth Stevens-Davidowitz. Evelyn's also hosting that. He just published this book. Very cool speaker, very funny. I've listened to some of his pods and interviews from his previous book, Everybody Lies. I will put that link in the chat once Lindsay gets started. That one, you just have to register through a different system because like I said, that's an IL open event. We're going to try and have one open event per month and then 3 membership events, unless it's like the 4th of July week, right? We won't have anything during a holiday week here in the US. So that's kind of the cadence. May 27th, Colin's back. Hopefully, if you caught Colin's talk last week, it was fascinating about his experiments in Nairobi. But Colin's coming back May 27th. So saving versus spending and household budgets. And then Pauline, some of you may have met in the cohort. She is coming back to melt your brains using BSci frameworks in organizations and then asking better questions with BSci. And we're working on an open event for June as well. So stay tuned. We're doing this at a nice clip. So this is the Don't Trust Your Gut book. He is the author of Everybody Lies. Like I said, I'll put that in the link once Lindsay gets started. But let's talk about Dr. J and today. So we are talking about cleaning up sludge. So put your dirty work gear on, put your protective gloves on. We're going into the plumbing. We're going to get rid of sludge. It's going to be absolutely disgusting. Metaphorically. So she is going to, hopefully some of you got to see Dilip's nudge stock presentation. And if you didn't, we'll do a high level summary. But first, a little bit about Lindsay. She's not just this smiling face you see there. Look at that smile, great smile. But she is so much more. Let me tell you about how much more Lindsay actually is. So she is an expert at applying behavioral science insights to encourage meaningful behavioral change. She makes me a nicer person every time I see her. And that's because she's messing with my mind. She's particularly interested in interventions that make taking the daily behaviors that lead to long-term goal success, such as exercising or saving for retirement, not just easier, but more enjoyable and fun. At Irrational Labs, she's one of our directors. She focuses on designing and testing interventions in financial and health domains. Before coming to IL, she was a senior behavioral researcher at the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke, a behavioral science center committed to research to make people happier, healthier, and wealthier. Prior to her work at IL and the CAH, she worked for the federal government. She lives in Canada, by the way, but she is a Texan. She is born in America. You say hook 'em horns to Texans, even if they didn't go to Texas. But she worked for the Federal Government Accountability Office and at NYU on a series of multi-site school interventions to reduce the racial and academic achievement gap. Her research has been funded by grants from the National Science Foundation, the Templeton Foundation, and published in top policy and psychology journals. She's consulted for energy and sustainability nonprofits and worked with clients as varied as mediation startups, and cookbooks to international banks to incorporate behavioral science insights. She has a BA from Reed College, very interesting school out in Oregon, and a PhD in social psychology from the University of Virginia, which is where Madam Secretary went to school, just so you know, if you're a fan of that show. Taya Leone. At any rate, in the service of the quest for enjoyable exercise, she's completed her 200-hour yoga teacher certification and 2 bar instructor certifications. But wait, Lindsay, before we go to you, wait, what, you consulted for cookbooks? I missed this last time I read this bio. Can you just elaborate quickly?
Yeah, we were working with a cookbook that was thinking about how to incorporate behavioral science principles in well, actually step back. The perspective of her cookbook was thinking about making health food changes with a cultural mindset or with a cultural perspective. So if you are someone in the US who has not grown up like eating baked chicken breast, and then you go to a nutritionist and they're like, you have diabetes, you need to change your diet, eat a lot of baked chicken breast and nothing else. Her thought was, can we think about making healthy food for cultures that have like had more spices or like very regional things? And so thinking about that, and then she was like, well, as long as I'm making things better, why don't I layer in some behavioral science in that too? Thinking about making changes to habits, exercises, diet, that kind of stuff.
Okay, no pressure, Lindsay, but I would love to have a membership talk on that asset. Just get back to me if there's no NDA. That sounds like a wild discussion, so bring it. So intro aside, let's get the party started here. Let me stop sharing so Lindsay can take over. But thank you again for everybody coming today. We love having you here. We love these discussions and hope, oh yeah, see, Caro said that's so interesting. I know, Carl, that's what I said. That's why we need her to do a talk. But anyways, yeah, Lindsay, take it away.
Always be closing. I like it. Okay. Yes. So let me play with my view so I can see more faces at once. Get it all situated. So this model for a membership event is, I think, slightly different. It's less meant to be me talking at you one-to-many, but instead more of a discussion. And Ryan assured me that you all have been engaged and excited and participatory. So hopefully that's the case here. But my thought was this could be kind of like a journal club or an article club. And so ideally, you did your homework ahead of time, which was either you watched the 18 minutes, I think roughly, video of Dr. Dilip Soman giving his talk at Nudge Stop 2020 on Sludge, or if you like me, don't like to listen to things, there was also a transcript, which you could have read as well. But like Ryan said, I'm in Canada, so now I am adopting my residence countrymen and my Canadian affiliations. And so Dr. Dilip Soman, he is truly incredible. I'm very impressed by his research, and I will not be able to do him justice with a full bio. But he is a Canada Research Chair, which is a very prestigious position here in the university systems in behavioral science and economics. And I think most interesting, he is, I would say, one of the top 3 to 5 faces of researchers in behavioral economics and applied behavioral science. So, right, like Dick Thaler, Dan Ariely, those are sort of the top tier big names because I think they've written more books. Although Dr. Soman is on a book tour right now, so maybe he's making his move. But he runs the Behavioral Economics in Action Research Center. It's normally called BEAR. It's associated with the business school at University of Toronto. I would say the premier applied research group in Canada. They do a lot of consultation with the federal government. They do a lot of work with Toronto and the city. So big impacts on the kind of things that I think we probably all care about. And I'm going to let someone in. One of the things that I think he has a particularly interesting perspective on has been sludge, and thinking about not only do we need to be really thoughtful about making things easy so people can nudge and that sort of choice architecture, thinking about defaults, that is obviously really foundational. I think he has also made it part of his mission to really call out when is an organization or a group sort of using behavioral insights for bad. And this is an interesting question. It comes up a lot in behavioral science and in these sorts of talks, like what are the ethics? Couldn't we use these things if we are nudging people and hoping that they accept our default? What if we made it a bad default? And that's exactly what he was saying in this article or in this talk that you read. So I've laid out sort of his quadrants, and we can just walk through sort of what they are. And then I have a few examples, but I'm hoping that what we can do is you can also call out things that you have seen recently. We can talk about what behavioral principles are being leveraged there, and then how would you undo it if you, maybe it's your own product that you realize something in doing an audit, maybe it's your local government, something like that. But I think it'll be a nice way for us to sort of hone our behavioral science mindset and perspective. And so you can see classic quadrant here. And so it moves from, does this make it easy to hard? And does it hurt versus help? And so nudges, I put them in that bottom corner there. They're making it easy and they're in the service of the user. So this is something that someone would choose for themselves that we generally agree are positives, net goods for the consumer. They would choose this for themselves. And so you're helping them by making it a little bit easier for them, not requiring quite as many decisions, simplifying those choices, whatever it might be. And then still in the beneficial category, down at the bottom, this idea of sort of active choices, decision points, moments to help you cool down. So if you're in a hot state, if you're agitated, you're being impulsive, can we pause a little bit? And so could you design choice architecture that rather than making it easy for you to proceed, makes it a little bit harder, but with the thought that you'll use that friction, you'll use that slowdown to perhaps reconsider, make your long-term decision, right? Like this is why if you are trying to eat fewer chips, maybe even if it's not as eco-friendly, you might want single serving chip bags, because then you have to really commit and be like, I guess I'm going to eat that third bag, as opposed to just like continuing through one large Costco size bag. And then top category, since we were thinking about sludge, I decided to make that the negative ones. You can see that now we've moved into things that people would not choose for themselves. Maybe it goes directly against their wishes. Maybe it's harmful to their long-term desires, their health, their well-being. And so when you are making it easier to end up in those bad places, that's what they call dark patterns. And so if you are a UX designer, you're probably familiar with this idea. It's the thing like ghost buttons. It's when you move where people expect something to be. Can you trick people into signing up for newsletters, into subscriptions that auto renew? All of those things are making it easier to do something that ultimately harms the consumer's well-being. And finally, sludge, which is really the focus for today, but I think we can also talk about dark patterns. Often they go hand in hand, which is basically now still thinking the outcome is still negative for the consumer. It's still something that they would not want, but rather than making it easy, you're saying, now you can't undo it. We're making it really hard for you to get rid of this, to break through this process. So does anyone have questions about the matrix first before I jump into examples?
No.
Perfect. That's easy. Okay, so this one, nudge, very classic, is the idea, can you make it easy? So I won't belabor this point. I think at this point, anyone who is in membership knows what a nudge is and how effective defaults are. So I put up a very classic example, which is save more tomorrow, right? So I, as a company, enroll my employees in automatic savings for retirement, and then in the process also escalate that in the future. Very, very classic choice architecture. It benefits the users long-term. It's not super painful at the beginning, so you do get a lot of uptake. And then of course, people always have agency. They can unenroll very simply. Dark patterns. I chose this one. This happened to another member of our team, one of the men at Duke. I realize now I should have blocked his address. Oh boy, okay. We'll fix that in
I'll
post.
hold a virtual hand over it. Everyone will close their eyes. We're good. We're good.
I assumed he would have blocked it out. Okay, sorry.
Oh yeah, nice play. Good, like it.
Well, basically what you can see here, what this picture says is it's a check made out for $200 to Hans, and it's already signed and it's got a date and it's ready to go. It is in fact a legit check. But what that check is actually a cash advance pulling on his credit card. And it does come attached to a letter. And so in that letter, you can say, it says, do you want some extra cash? Here's an option for you. And so it's not an outright lie. And I don't think that that's what a dark pattern is you're not actively lying, but you are sort of banking on the fact that people get checks in the mail sometimes. Maybe you're paid physically. I think that's increasingly rare, but maybe you got a tax return, whatever it might be. You get a check in the mail, you sign it, you mobile deposit, you take it to the bank, whatever it is, and that's it. You move on with your life. And it's only upon looking at the rest of the letter, reading it, and understanding what you're getting yourself into. If you cash this check, they're going to charge you a fee for the advance itself, and then you're going to pay interest on that money that has been extended to you via your credit card. And I think Capital One is trying to get you to use their product. They're making the bad thing, not the bad thing necessarily, but something that perhaps you wouldn't do with extra consideration. They're making it a little bit easier, perhaps a dark pattern. Maybe I'll pause here and say, does anyone else have classic examples of this one?
I was just going to say, I feel like that should be illegal. It just doesn't seem fair. And I also think about the TurboTax example where they were basically encouraging people to not use the free version. Is that kind of a similar example?
Moira, you went off mute. Did you want to say something? I was going to defer.
No, I was waiting for you to answer to that, but I had another example of being at a bank where a teller was explaining to a new adult. So he'd had a youth account and had just turned 18 and was explaining to this young man that his new account came with overdraft protection, which he wasn't understanding. And it was automatic. And his understanding finally was that he had $300 extra. And the teller said, yes, that's what that means. You have $300 more than you actually know that you have. And so that was an example of something that struck me as being wrong and way too easy.
Oh man, yeah, that is not the way I would interpret overdraft.
Yeah.
Jeez.
I've got another example as well. Sorry, it's noisy. I'm just out on the street. Having nice walks this time. There's a company called Ryanair. They're basically a flight operation service here in Europe. Basically, their whole checkout is their Crocker wonderland, so to speak. At every point, a customer or a potential customer user is actually encouraged to get extra stuff and to pay more for things. And sometimes they assign things automatically. So there are things like you cannot proceed to checkout unless you pay for insurance. You have to specifically say, no, I don't want to be insured. I don't want to be safe. So there's a language written with guilt and shame if you don't take care of things. So yeah, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think these are all great examples. I see there's a lot going on thinking about Intuit in the chat and TurboTax. I think that one is a combination really of dark patterns and sludge, right? They're trying to trick you into paying for things and making that easy. And then also saying, if you want to switch to free, we're gonna like make you start over all the way. I think low cost airlines, exactly, Edgar, so true. I think Ryanair is a classic one. Hans was buying plane tickets the other day and he said that he got tricked into buying insurance. I feel like I'm really throwing Hans under the bus here, but I think actually he's just most forthcoming to everyone about the BE that's trying to take him in. Where's Caro? Caro, tell us where you're at.
I'm in Spain. I'm in Valencia.
That's beautiful.
Which is, yeah, it's just gotten very nice. it was raining for months straight, so yeah. Just enjoying here.
Okay, that balances, because for a moment all the rest of us were dying of jealousy.
I know, right? No, we've had our fair amount of misery, so yeah, rest assured.
Okay, let's go to cooling off period, which I also thought the example I showed here is from Irrational Labs work with TikTok. So we had that pop up when people were sharing a potential misinformation video, and it had been flagged, but then if someone clicked share, there was this additional bit of friction asking people to make a decision, building in a little point for them to say, do I want to share something that might be inaccurate? Maybe not. About 24% of people canceled their share. I had another example, which is in the US, speaking of airlines, if you buy a plane ticket, it is federally mandated that you have 24 hours to cancel it. No fees associated with it, full cancellation, no reason needed. I think it's to let you notice if you have like booked the wrong date or something, and you can always take it back. Which didn't feel like a cooling off period, but I do think it's a nice sort of parallel of let's let you reconsider this potentially very expensive purchase and think if you need to change it or update that in some way. Anyone else have a good cooling off, trying to build in a little bit of pause for you to reconsider if something is actually what you want to do?
You know, Lindsay, you might remember who the researcher is. I believe she's at Columbia and she did it with policing, you know, where she kind of gave police a checklist before they pulled people over to check for implicit bias. Do you remember who this was?
Oh, no.
Now I have to go find that video.
Yeah, who would it have been?
Chat. Oh, I'll find it. So just if someone's in the waiting room, you know I'm Googling. So
do you think it's Betsy Paluck? I feel like Betsy Paluck is the one who's doing all the really interesting sort of field studies on bias.
Lindsay, I don't want to go by feels. I want to go by Googles. So give me a hot minute.
Yeah, maybe
fair enough.
Maybe when you're trying to cancel some subscription, you always have that like a cooling off. Are you sure you want to subscribe? You will lose your VIP status or something like that. They always have this cooling off.
Yeah. Do we think that's to our benefit or to their benefit, though?
Well, yeah, that's not.
Yeah, I think maybe depending on how aggressively they're making you cool off, maybe I might even push it into sludge, right? It's interesting because it's two sides of the same coin in all of these. And it's sort of like, whose interests are we serving and how aggressively does the company benefit at my expense versus are we like both sort of working toward the same goal?
Yeah, makes sense.
Marriage license applications often, you can't just apply and get married immediately. They make you wait a few days.
Right, that's why Vegas weddings are so popular, because there's like no waiting period. In North Carolina. Oh, I was just going to say.
Oh, sorry, Lindsay.
No, I was going to say very briefly. In North Carolina, they have a cooling off period of 1 year if you want to get divorced. You like file for divorce, and then a year later you're finally divorced, which is like a very extreme version of a cooling off period. But sorry, Brett, please take over.
Oh no, I was also thinking about gun laws more recently, making it in some states, I guess. I'm not a gun expert, but um virtually in some states impossible to buy a gun on the spot. Like you have to, you can pay for it, blah blah blah, but you can't actually have it for 24 hours. And I think that I would think of that as a cooling off period, just to ensure that you know the obvious isn't the intent.
Yeah, I really like that one.
Yeah, that's on a governmental level in the United Kingdom. There's actually a cooling off period for any product bought online, 14 days for the customer to return the product and to make their change their mind. So that's very interesting as well.
Oh, that is interesting. So is it 14 days from when I order it or from when it arrives?
From when you bought it.
Ah, cool.
So it's basically to protect the rice.
Okay, I'll move us to Sludge. This one is very fresh. I don't know if you're in the US, Venmo is a peer-to-peer money transfer process. If you're not in the US, maybe if you're in the US, you have used and know it. But they have a new policy by which you can opt out of arbitration through the very, very simple steps of printing a form, filling it out, giving it a wet signature, and mailing it to Venmo. Or you can just exist and not do all of those things. And then you are stuck in arbitration or not in arbitration. But it's just like so crazy. The whole purpose of Venmo is let's never go to a bank. Let's make it as seamless as possible. And then they're like, let's ruin it right here. Maybe all the rest of you are going to use Venmo as your Sludge example. I'm sorry to have taken it. It was just too good, too awful.
Yeah, this one drives me a little bonkers. I had a recent experience. I was buying an iPad, and on the Apple site, I was given an incentive to buy the iPad with a $200 gift certificate from my wireless provider. And so great. I figured that in on my computation. Thought, okay, well, since I can buy it for $200 less, this is totally within budget. So bought it, and then it took probably 9 phone calls, multiple websites, an application for the discount from the wireless provider. It was for Americans, it was Verizon. Not that I'm bad mouthing Verizon. Anyway, yeah, don't go to Verizon. They're awful. But I was really amazed. It took no one at Apple knew how to get the discount. And then when I went to Verizon, they didn't know how to actually get the discount. And then when I found the discount, I found that I had to go to a website and apply a certain code in the website. And that was only that, and I had to describe what I'd done, and then I submitted it would go away for 30 days, and then they'd get back to me with the decision of whether or not I'd get the discount. And no one knew once I even found the process, no one knew what the right code I should use to apply for it was. It was mind-boggling. And so, that's perfect. When I read the paper this morning that you were going to talk on, Lindsay, I thought, oh my gosh, this is this is everywhere. And I do think it's intentional.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to give people the benefit of the doubt when it's something that convoluted. I saw Sharon in the chat is saying Orange Theory requires you to go in person to the first studio you signed up for, I guess, presumably to cancel your membership, even if you have since moved. That's wild.
Yeah, so it was in fact during the pandemic, and they were continuing to charge me, and I had to go down to Portland to go into the studio, which was closed, to get out of my agreement. And even then, you had to give them 30 days notice, and then there was an extra 2 weeks. It was crazy.
I think
Obviously,
fitness
I
places
fought
are
that
really
and
bad.
won, but it was hard work to fight it.
Thank goodness. Yeah, fitness places are bad. So I later in this, maybe it's my next one, Obey. I love Obey. It's my like online fitness platform of choice. Your ability to cancel your subscription is so bad. They make you call them, and you can only call from like 10 to 4 Eastern, and you have to give notice. It's just like, come on, guys, just let me cancel. I
Lindsay,
haven't canceled.
I had a question about sludge. Do we only use that term when talking about removing decisions? Like Brett's example was, he was actually trying to do something and they just made an option difficult, which sounds incredibly annoying, Brett. But in your table, you talked about make it difficult to remove or undo decisions and purchases. So is it always about the undoing with sludge?
No, that's probably an oversimplification of my chart, because it's really about like keeping you from what you want.
Positive or negative?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we put barriers in your ability to get to the outcome that you want to be at? Yeah, good call out. Thank you for that correction. And so for, I guess the way Dilip frames it, he says there are sort of 3 major factors. And so I think that's kind of what we're getting at with all of these examples, is that there are clunky processes, right? Where you just have a lot of steps. Those steps have a lot of requirements. You have paper forms. I think in his example, he uses that newspaper subscription and how many steps it required to take that down. For me here, Obey is making us call them on the phone. There is, if anyone watched the TV show Nathan for You, I'm like dating myself. This was very popular, medium popular several years ago, but he was a comedian, and his shtick was every episode he focused on helping a struggling business improve income, improve profits, and but in like a really egregious way. And so one of them, he worked with a gas station, and he said, we're going to get you a lot of customers, more people are going to buy gas because we're going to offer a discount, but the process of redeeming the discount is going to be like Brett's iPad process. You have to print a paper form, you have to fill in your receipt, you have to drop your form in a particular mailbox, and that mailbox is at the top of a mountain in LA. And so like then they have to spend the night, and you like they start with, I don't know, like 20 customers who intend to get the rebate, and over the course of the labor and the sludge that he has built in, very few people do it, and ultimately there's a heartwarming conclusion. But so maybe I'd recommend that if you need something to watch. But basically, like, what are these processes, and just what are these steps? And in that case, I had sort of a question prompt here, but I think it's pretty obvious to us. Like for clunky processes, you want to get rid of it. And then Maura, you're saying, is that friction? I think so. I think that is just straight up barriers and steps and things that you have to endure and get through. And then there are sort of layers that you can start building in Sludge, which would then be, can you do poor communication? And these are all tangled up in each other, right? Like I'm going to have a really hard process, and then I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Or in Dilip's example, it was with the federal government, and saying you had to find a form and fill it out, by which you can then request a different form, which you also need. As someone who is navigating the Canadian system right now, trying to renew my health card, I had to visit a website to schedule an appointment for a phone call. And then on that phone call, they'll confirm my existence and then send me a form. And then I'll send the form and I'll get another form. So a lot of bureaucracy here. I can affirm that he's accurate in thinking about this paperwork. The example I have put up on the slide is we were working with a credit union through the Common Sense Lab to clean up their loan repayment letters. And it wasn't so much a clunky process, but they were communicating things really poorly in a way that made it harder for the members to pay on time. And basically what they were doing is they had a due date and then they had a 5-day grace period, and they put both of those dates equally prominently in the letter. And then they were like, why is no one paying on the due date? I was like, you have communicated to them 2 confusing dates. And that's why. And so some of that is just like, we have not made it simple for people to understand what they need to do. And so that is another thing that can layer in Sludge, where it maybe the process itself is pretty straightforward, 1 due date, but we have presented it to users in a way that gets really complicated and terrible. I don't know if anyone has a good example of that one off of their heads.
Poor communication can sometimes be over communication, right? I mean, where you get too many of the same message in different formats. To be honest with you, it's one of the reasons why right now I'm just sticking with the GCal invites. Like, until we get the LMS up, I don't want to hit you up with 50 different emails. And, I just want to, like, one simple invite for now. It's good enough. Other communication might muddle the message,
Yeah, that's nice.
Well, even if you just copy and paste, because different mediums make you, like, even if it's just an email, like, different mediums make you think differently. So it's like, keeping it simple. You guys,
Yeah, I like that one.
You make fun of me in the chat. By the way, I've been dropping stuff in the chat. So Sunstein has worked on sludge audits. I think the working paper has been evolved in his book, which I'm about to paste. And then I put kind of the working papers on the sludge dashboard in the chat and stuff like that. So resources are abounding. And the bias professor was at Stanford, not Columbia, my bad. So it was Jennifer Eberhardt, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways,
good.
Commercial interruption complete.
Well, Ryan, you already solved poor communication for us. You cleared it up. Simpler, fewer. And then the third contributor to Sludge, which I think is the most nebulous and hard to deal with, is processes that maybe they're smooth, maybe they're well communicated, but they create negative emotions in the person who is undertaking them, like shame. So in his example, Dilip Soman says, like, benefit forms, when you're applying for a housing subsidy or a reimbursement or a credit, they required you to talk about, like, the terrible state of your home and how your roof is falling in and you have mold growing and everything is awful. And they found that people didn't want to do that. It was embarrassing and shameful and unpleasant to write that in a form. And so people were not explaining the actual state of things. They weren't taking as much credit as they should have, or requesting enough benefit. And that is something that you have to be really mindful of and careful of. And so the example I was thinking of is sort of related, again, benefits. This was a recent New Yorker article, and it was focused on this young woman who was in the foster care system and then had gone to college and applied for scholarships. And she had applied to scholarships as a first generation college student. And it was sort of nebulous, like, because she was now an independent minor, she was in the foster system, like, did she have parents? Did she not? I think you can have a lot of interesting, complicated questions about this situation. But one of the comments in the article was this, one of her advisors was saying, I think it's really that she's being punished for not being desperate enough, because she is not like appropriately groveling, and so she's not making donors or people who are filling out these scholarships. She's not making her story tragic enough. And I think I'll tread delicately here, but I think sometimes scholarship applications, college applications, anything that has a personal statement, you start to feel like you need to do a little bit of performance to say, like, I've had a really hard time, and that's why I deserve this money. And you sort of have to bring up things that might be uncomfortable for you and lay them bare and be vulnerable in a way that could be unpleasant. And so thinking about, if you're someone who is designing these forms or setting up benefit processes or trying to get people to come in for financial coaching, all of these things, how can you take a really critical eye to what you are then asking people to share, and how do you build trust before those steps come in, or something else, so that if you do have to ask those questions, if you do really need people to tell you that their house is falling down and it's in dire shape, how do you set people up so that they then feel comfortable in those steps? So that, I shouldn't have started there, because now you all are all going to anchor on me, but that's sort of like how I would think about solving some of that. But the third one, I think, is the hardest piece. So I'll pause there if people have thoughts.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't know who was unmuted, but go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, so I'm Guneet. I'm speaking from Vietnam right now. Will we be using the term sludge again when we stop a person from undoing a right thing that he has done before? You know, so he has taken a right decision, let's say to donate his organs or to save more for his future, and then he comes to undo it. Will we use the same term sludge, or it's a different term?
Are we like trying to make it impossible for him to undo it?
Yes, a good thing that he has done before.
Ideally, we're not. Ideally, if we especially have like defaulted someone into organ donation, it's very easy for them to undo it. That's sort of one of the things about nudges, is they should still leave the user with a lot of agency, even if you have encouraged one particular path. So yeah, I think if you were like finders keepers, you signed this one time and now you can never change your mind again, then yeah, I might call it sludge, even if someone had originally opted into sort of what you thought was the good and desirable decision. And now you're like, I'm gonna keep you from changing your mind. You could call it sludge. Maybe you'd call it a cooling off period, depending on how laborious you made it. We worked with a credit union once, and they were designing a savings account for users who were experiencing homelessness, and so things were particularly dire for these groups. And if those users wanted and had opted into this particular savings account, then it was very easy to put money in, and the process of a withdrawal required a 24-hour cooling off period. And then there was like a secret fallback where if you like really did need the money right away, you could make a phone call to your case manager. But users really liked that, the overall program, and they said, I remember a particular quote, someone was like, oh, it keeps my money safe. And we're like, safe from? They're like, safe from me. And so I think that might be a parallel. I think organ donation is a hot button topic, but if I have put money into savings, then perhaps a little bit of friction for me to get it out might be cooling off. Maybe in the moment, if I were really wanting that money and feeling thwarted, I might say, oh no, it's sludge, in fact. It's a very fine line. And I think it has a lot to do with like, what's in your heart as a designer or as the person creating those forms? Are you really trying to thwart someone's wishes? Or do you think they might like to prioritize that long-term choice. And so could you build in a little pause if they need to reset?
Okay, okay. My second connected question is that many a times organizations do, make offers to, let's say, 100 customers, and they give some kind of a freebie, knowing this very fact that because of the attached terms and conditions, maybe 15 or 20% of people would be paying some kind of a fee to the bank. And those 20% of the people, the money that we collect from the 20% people, we use it to give a freebie to 80% of the people. And this is a standard business practice. Now, to those, say, 20% of people, you make slightly difficult for them to kind of, quickly move out, because if that ease is there, then the complete cost comes onto the bank. But if, some kind of a deliberate sludge is put in the complete process, that they find it difficult to undo what they have already decided. Now, how would you take it? This is a way in which, lazy people who don't think enough, help to give a freebie to 80% of other people. Is it the right thing to do ethically? Is it wrong?
Okay, this is a bigger existential question, perhaps, than I am ready for right now. If it were in the context of like government and society, I am so completely on board with, like, we pay taxes and our taxes go to then subsidize the people around us and the community and the potholes and whatever needs doing. So like, that's my bias out very publicly. And so I guess transitive property, I have to feel okay with it in the bank. I don't know. In a consumer context, I think it is a little bit tricky unless you're careful about who's subsidizing others and sort of how are they selected, and are you is it regressive, is it progressive, what does that look like? Realize that's not like a really one and done clear answer, but it's complicated. I agree.
Well, I think you're saying context matters a lot, right? And I think the other thing, Guneet, I'm going to find the link, but the book Scarcity is really interesting around this, because a lot of times we perceive people as lazy, but actually that's couldn't be further from the truth. They're just kind of beset with more barriers than most humans can bear, and as such lock into tunnel vision. So I'm going to get that link as well. Dan, I know you wanted to ask a question, then we're at about T-minus 10 minutes. So I just want to make sure Lindsay, we get everywhere you want to go. So Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I wrote it down in the chat. It was just a kind of, I was just musing about the kinds of things you're just talking about, Lindsay, which are like, it's almost like some of these moves that you put on your 2x2, like don't, some of them just kind of trick us, like we're not even aware of them. Some of these moves kind of summon up an interiority to the user, like they open up what do we think, what do we feel, and interestingly, like often by using friction for good or for ill. Like friction, we think we want to get rid of friction all the time, but sometimes it's a really cool idea that we want to create friction because it summons up the better parts of ourselves when we stop and think about it, for example. But it was a really trippy idea I was just thinking about as you were talking, which was like, I wonder if part of what you're asking us to do as designers is to think about what kind of person are we turning our users into? Like a thoughtful person who thinks about their long-term interest, someone who feels ashamed because their circumstances, are really crummy, and so they don't want to go there. Like that's just it doesn't make these decisions any easier, but it's an interesting, to me at least in the moment, an interesting way of framing the kind of decision we're making, maybe. So I'm throwing that out there. I don't know.
Yeah, I like that. Thinking about what's the context we're setting, and then how does that context change the person, even momentarily. That's a nice way to frame it. I had another thought and I've lost it. I'm sorry.
This happens to the best of our thoughts.
Oh, I know what it was. It was that sometimes that question about like, are we trying to make a thoughtful user is something that we run into a lot. I do a lot of work with financial well-being, and sometimes banks or credit unions or someone will say like, isn't it better that rather than someone setting up an automatic savings every week or bi-weekly, isn't it better to like, don't we want people to really think about saving money every week and like understand and feel proud of themselves and appreciate it, and every week thoughtful. And I think it's sort of an interesting challenge, right? Like it would be great if we had figured out how to make people more aware, more thoughtful, more financially literate. And like, frankly, that's just not how the data breaks down. It is in fact better for savings behavior if you can get that one-time decision. But I don't know that that's the case for all different things where we might want to, teach someone to fish, right?
Lindsay, in the spirit of article discussion, I had a really interesting idea. So that this has been popping around the chat, like parsing the difference between sludge and friction, and cooling off period. I mean, they all have slightly different connotations, shades of the same meaning. But my daughter's going to 6th grade. So here's one for you. So we had junior high orientation the other night. And I'm a former high school and elementary school principal. So like I know about how the sausage is made in schools. And there are like 200 people in this auditorium. And this parent is angry at the principal because their 6th grader can't choose their electives, like that the robo system is going to choose their electives. Now, you could perceive this as sludge, right? Like, oh, the system's too hard. Like you can't give my kid the elective they need. And this woman was angry, to choose a better word, angry at this principal at orientation night. I'm like, what are you doing? Now, on the back end, I know how sloppy the system is, right? Like all kinds of variables limit you, the number of teachers, the number of classes, the number of kids you can put in each class. If you have 2 sections of honors algebra or whatever, like you can't just take art during honors algebra, right? There are all these system things in the background. So my title for a talk that I'm inventing now would be Perceptions of Sludge versus Systems, right? So sometimes the system is such that someone perceives something as sludge, but really the system is necessarily complicated. And you can't service people, you can't service 600 kids, right? Completely equally based on some real constraints and variables. So that's an interesting thing. Like a lot of times sludge is sludge, but sometimes it's a system that you can't bend in its present form, So that's I'm adding that definition to the, to perceive sludge versus actual sludge.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback on that, Ryan, like I was thinking about the same thing. A lot of the work that I do in consulting used to be around process improvement. And I'm dumbfounded for, really good companies, really big companies, when I go in and look at, get into the details of their process, my inside voice is going like, you guys do what? But the intentions are not sludge. It's just messy processes, and sometimes necessarily so.
Yeah, I think so. There are a couple of Canadian governments that have hosted not sludgeathons, but like sludge audits. And then you were saying, I think Ryan was linking to the sludge audits, because the DC government I know does a nudgeathon, which I think is ultimately ends up kind of being a sludge audit, where they have community members and behavioral scientists and government staffers, and they all just like tackle something. I think recently it was the DMV and license renewal forms, and just like, how do we slash and burn steps and processes? Because I think, like Brett, like you're saying, they just sort of build over time too, right? No one is ever nefariously like, let's keep people from unsubscribing, maybe. But I think in some of the nonprofit space and companies that do have good intentions, it just gets messy. We are almost at time. Ryan, do we have like last minute things? I'll say that this was wonderful. I had so much fun talking with you all. Really, really thoughtful questions. This was great.
Yeah, thank you for doing the timekeeping thing. I was all excited about Edgar's comments. I'm like, oh, let me talk to you. Yeah, I just want to point out we're experimenting with different formats. So this is kind of very open. You notice Lindsay had a lot of wait time. This is for us to kind of think and process ideas together. I mean, clearly you have some takeaways immediate, like you can think about different types of sludge. But this particular talk was to explore as if we were a book club or an article group, you know, at graduate school or whatever. So I hope you enjoyed it. Sharon, I'll just read Sharon's only one I saw. Fascinating topic, Lindsay. Thanks. She meant it. Say it out loud, Sharon. Unmute. Tell Lindsay.
It's fantastic. Thank you, Lindsay. Gave me a lot to think about.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, and we surfaced a lot of great questions. I mean, all sludge is not nefarious. You know, Brett's super funny. Like, what are you thinking? And then you find out and you're like, oh, you were thinking. It's still a mess. And there are ways to refine these processes. The only, next week again, next Friday is going to be the how I broke into behavioral science. And then I'm putting down there, please sign up for the Don't Trust Your Gut event. That's on a Thursday. Like I said, that's open for all friends of IL. So just sign up over there. We'd love to see you at that one. He's supposed to be a riot. Not that Lindsay and I aren't super funny, but he's supposed to be way better. So on that, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lindsay. And we'll see you at the next thing. Oh, and I'll stop recording. Maybe.
Thank you, guys. Good night.
It was great.